Anybody who pays any attention can tell you there is an epidemic of diabetes which is ravaging much of our world. When you consider just how much more diabetes there is today than there ever was in previous generations, it is staggering. But within this epidemic, there is some great news that not too many people recognize. And this news can be your ticket out of diabetes and into a restoration of your glucose levels and your health. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description. I've been watching a documentary that aired on PBS, which they titled Blood Sugar Rising: America's Hidden Diabetes Epidemic. It's been interesting, and they did a pretty good job in much of what they presented. I didn't agree with everything that was said or implied, of course, but it's definitely worth the watch. In this video, I'll share a few of the things they said, and we'll take a good look at one of their main premises, with which I totally agree, and that is that the rate of the growth of diabetes in the U.S. is blowing through the roof. If I knew very little about diabetes and its effects and its prevalence, after watching this video, I would come to the conclusion that diabetes is a really big deal. And that, of course, is undeniably true. It is a big deal. It's a big deal because of how many people have it. It's a big deal because of how it's growing exponentially across the world. And it's a big deal because of how devastating it can be to your health. Anyone who takes diabetes lightly is just flat out ignorant. And anyone who's told they're even pre-diabetic and doesn't take it seriously or make any effort to change the trajectory of their life and their health is most foolish indeed. The documentary declares that in America alone there are an estimated 100 million people with diabetes and prediabetes. They predict that this number will explode and that half the U.S. population will have diabetes or prediabetes by the year 2025. Now, that's just 5 years away. And if that's true, that is absolutely staggering. The current population of the U.S. is 328 million. So this means that right now, not quite 1 in 3 Americans has either diabetes or prediabetes. And if you were to look more carefully into metabolic syndrome, which develops well before glucose levels get out of control, almost surely about half the population of the U.S. has metabolic problems and is on the path to diabetes, heart disease, high blood sugar, and so forth. In short, despite all of our advances in medicine, despite all of our amazing hospitals and amazing doctors and nurses and health experts, despite all the health and fitness books, TV shows, and YouTube videos, the health of the American people is atrocious. This documentary makes a good case for the fact that it didn't used to be this bad. One person reported a generation ago, less than 3% of Americans had diabetes. Today, it's almost 10%. One doctor who was interviewed said, "When I started out as a young doctor, about 1 in 20 of my patients had type 2 diabetes. Now it's 1 in 2. What in the world is going on? Dan Hurley, a science journalist, said this, 150 years ago, a doctor could go most of their career and maybe see 1 or 2 people with diabetes. It was just considered a very rare disease, and it had been since ancient times. Now, this was not news to me, but one thing they stated did take me by surprise. They made the point that it's not just type 2 diabetes that's growing exponentially. Even type 1 diabetes is multiplying like crazy. Dan Hurley stated, everybody knows that type 2 diabetes has been increasing. What most people don't get is that type 1, what used to be called childhood onset diabetes, has been increasing at the same rate. When I developed type 1 diabetes in 1975, I didn't meet anyone else who had that disease at my college. I didn't meet friends. I didn't have family who had type 1 diabetes. Today, I know so many people with type 1. Not because I wrote a book about it, but my neighbor down the block, the girl around the corner, the editor of my local paper, the priest at my church. Well, I've always assumed that type 1 diabetes was sort of a freak autoimmune issue that was totally inexplicable and unrelated to lifestyle issues. If you developed type 1 diabetes, you were just unlucky. Type 2 diabetes is an entirely different ballgame. But if this documentary is correct and type 1 diabetes really is increasing at the same rate as type 2 diabetes, there may be more lifestyle issues behind it than most of us had previously thought. But I'm not going to comment any more on that. I'd like to see more statistics from varied sources in order to be convinced that this is true. But if it is, and the rate of type 1 diabetes is increasing at the same rate as type 2, there are some profound implications in that. But let's deal with what we know for sure. Type 2 diabetes is increasing like crazy, not just in the U.S., but in most of the world. Diabetes is all over India, all over Australia, all over the UK. And from the comments that are left under my videos, I have to believe it's a major problem in Pakistan, in most of the Middle Eastern countries, and pretty much everywhere else in the world. The coronavirus has been called a pandemic, but you could almost say the same thing about diabetes. Diabetes is not contagious, of course, but the lifestyle that creates diabetes is contagious. Now, I said at the beginning that in the midst of this epidemic, there is some wonderful and some great news, and I want to talk about that now. If you really understand how diabetes works, it can give you hope to learn that diabetes is and has been rapidly increasing in our world. You say, how can you see any hope in that? Okay, here's the deal. If diabetes was not increasing and had never increased, if the rate of diabetes has always remained locked steady in our world, say at 2% of the world's population, we wouldn't really have much of a reason to hope for any improvement in our own lives. We could only hope in our youth that we would fall in the lucky 98% and not fall into the unlucky 2% that get diabetes. If in the days of Moses, for example, 2% of the world had diabetes, and in the days of the apostles, 2% of the world had diabetes, and in the days of the French Revolution, 2% of the world had diabetes, and the days of Abraham Lincoln, 2%, and the days of our grandparents, 2% had diabetes, and today 2% of the world had diabetes, we'd just have to consider type 2 diabetes as a totally genetic disease that had nothing to do with lifestyle. Furthermore, we'd have no reason to suppose that any change of lifestyle would make any significant difference. Regardless of your diet, regardless of your weight, regardless of your activity level, regardless of whether you live mostly on cinnamon rolls or mostly on salads, your chances of getting diabetes would be exactly the same. 2 out of every 100 would be losers in the genetic lottery. 98 out of 100 would be winners. But it's not that way. Everybody knows that the rate of diabetes has skyrocketed in the last generation, or perhaps the last generation and a half. And as I said, that gives us hope. There must be something we've been doing differently in the last 75 years or so that is affecting our health. Is it wearing Nike running shoes? Grandpa never wore those. No, I don't think that's it. Is it using our cell phones? Are they responsible for all this diabetes? I don't think so. But what some sharp doctors and researchers have figured out is that this explosion of diabetes has to do with the foods that we put in our mouths. We simply don't eat the way our great-grandparents ate. We eat far more carbohydrates than they did. We eat far more fruit than they did. We eat an enormous amount of sugar and foods with added sugar, which they would never have dreamed of eating. And I'm persuaded that it is this glut of excess carbohydrates and tons of sugar which are the primary culprit that has led to an explosion of diabetes. But once you understand this and you really get it, you get excited because there is nobody forcing us to eat this way. Not our mamas, not our daddies, not our neighbors. Nobody's forcing us. And we can undo this situation anytime we want. And if this premise is correct, that our world is drowning in an ocean of carbohydrates, it follows that as soon as we cut most of those carbs out of our diet, we should see our health and our glucose levels returning to normal. And of course, the other thing is to simply stop eating so much and so often. And that brings us right back to, you guessed it, a low-carb diet and time-restricted eating and occasional day-long fasting. And lo and behold, we're hearing of testimonies by the thousands from people who have made these changes in their lifestyle, and their glucose levels and their A1C scores dropped right down into normal levels within a few months or perhaps a year. So here's the newsflash. The rate of diabetes is not static. It is rapidly increasing, and that must mean there is a lifestyle component involved. All we have to do is identify that lifestyle component that is creating all this mess and then make the appropriate changes, and we'll see amazing victory in our lives. And that, of course, is what this Beat Diabetes YouTube channel is all about. All right, let me share a few thoughts on some of the other quotes from this documentary. It's called Blood Sugar Rising, America's Hidden Diabetes Epidemic. A lot that was said, I agree with, but some things I had a bit of a problem with. Here's one statement by Dr. Enrique Caballero with which I totally agree. He says diabetes is truly a silent disease. It could take up to 15 years for someone with diabetes to develop the first symptoms that are related to high blood sugar levels. Well, he's absolutely right. You can have diabetes or you can be moving toward diabetes for over a decade before you see any problematic symptoms. This is why everyone needs to get regular A1C tests. And not only that, we need to test our glucose after our meals to see how extreme our blood sugar spikes are. Anyone who can spike up to 180 or 200 milligrams per deciliter after any meal has some problems. Now, it may take you a decade or more to get a full-scale diagnosis of diabetes, but that doesn't mean you're not hurting yourself right now. Some of the smartest people I run across in the comments under my videos are those who say, I don't have diabetes, but I want to eat right so that I never get it. Very, very smart. Now, here's a statement that was in the documentary that I don't entirely agree with. They refer to diabetes as a chronic disease that is notoriously difficult to control. Okay, I understand where they're coming from. For many people, it is difficult to control, and for some, it seems nearly impossible. But for most type 2 diabetics, in my opinion, it's not all that hard to control. The principle is simple enough. Cut your carbs, restrict your window of eating, and watch your glucose levels drop. And if they're not dropping much after several months or they're not dropping fast enough, cut your carbs some more and narrow that window of eating a bit more. Now, if you say, I'm eating almost no carbs, my window of eating is 4 to 6 hours each day, and I've been doing this for many months and I still see almost no progress, well, then it's time to find out what your pancreas is doing and whether it's putting out enough insulin. You might be a type 1 diabetic, or you might be a LATA or a type 1.5. So find out where you stand by going to a good endocrinologist. And if you need to take insulin, then take it. Let me repeat that. If you need to take insulin, then take it. But I've heard so many testimonies from people who've suddenly found victory over high glucose, sometimes after going years seeing no victory, that I have to believe that for most type 2 diabetics, diabetes is not difficult to beat. Sure, it takes some time and some sacrifices, but so does getting a college degree or training for an athletic competition or learning the skills to be a plumber. Often our problem is simply a lack of motivation to make the changes we know we need to make. We think, I want victory over diabetes, but I want to enjoy my big spaghetti dinners. Or, I want an A1C in the 5s, but I cannot give up my apple pie. Or, I'll never stop eating rice, or I'd rather die than do without baked potatoes. Or don't ask me to deny myself my orange juice. And yes, in those cases, when you're determined to hang on to a lot of food that's doing the exact opposite of what you want it to do, diabetes is very, very difficult to control. In fact, I would say it's almost impossible. Another statement I cringed at was this one. Exciting new progress in drugs and technologies have made the disease more manageable. Okay, I'll admit, if they're talking about a continual glucose monitor, well, that's a technology that is exciting, although I've never used one. But what's exciting to me is to beat this monster so thoroughly, you no longer need the drugs. Don't tell me about all kinds of exciting new drugs. Let's talk about a new lifestyle and way of eating. And we're hearing testimonies like this nearly every single day. If you need drugs, by all means take them, but as you make the lifestyle changes you need to make, you'll probably hear your doctor telling you, well, I think we can take you off this drug or off that medication. And hopefully in time you can have a celebration party where you celebrate the fact that you can keep your glucose normal without any drugs at all. And that, my friend, is truly worth celebrating. People are always asking me, do you take any diabetic medications? And the answer is no. From the beginning of my blood sugar problems, I was determined to beat this thing without drugs. And my answer when I'm asked this is no, I've never taken any diabetic meds. Not that I'm against them. I just caught it in time to where I didn't have to. Again, the documentary I've been talking about is Blood Sugar Rising, America's Hidden Diabetes Epidemic. It's on YouTube, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. And I'll also leave a link to a website that has the transcript written out. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up so YouTube will recognize its value and promote it to other diabetics seeking answers. And I hope you'll subscribe to this channel and then click that bell icon. That way you'll be notified every time we post a new video. God bless. See you again soon.